Okay, so we're back in our code editor, and I'm located in lecture 41, which is located in full stack-course 5 examples folder. And this code sample is basically the same as lecture 40, but we're bringing our spinner back. Except we're bringing our spinner back, and it's now going to respond, instead of to the custom events that we're throwing, it's going to respond to the events that the UI router is throwing. So the first thing we need to do is go to our shopping list module.js and import our spinner module. And we see here we're importing the UI.router and we're importing the spinner module as well. Now the spinner module is going to be slightly different. Let's go ahead and go to the component.js, which is where the main logic is located. We're declaring the component loading spinner, and the component is going to have the spinner controller. In this controller, we're going to do the following. On the $init, we're going to go ahead and listen for some of these events. Number one is we're going to listen for the state change start event. And when the change set start event fires, we're going to respond by setting the controller show spinner to true. Well, show spinner equals true will turn on our spinner image and make it visible. If we look to our components template, and you'll see that we have an ngIf with the controller and show spinner. So if the show spinner property is true, this image will show up. Let's go back to the component.js. So point is, if we detect the $state change start, this is when the UI router is starting the transition, it will turn the show spinner to true. It will also remember the function that the $on method produces, because that function is something we could cancel listening for this event later. And what we're going to do is we're going to have outside of our $init function this cancelers array, and we're basically going to push our cancel for this particular event, our cancel function, onto this cancels array. And you'll see in a second why we're doing that. We're also going to listen for $state change success. That means that the transition has finished, and therefore we can go ahead and turn off the spinner by setting show spinner equals false. Once again, this listener will get pushed onto our cancelers array that we'll use later. And the last but not least, the state change error. So if any error occurs, we don't want our spinner to keep going on and on forever. We want the spinner to stop. And therefore, we're listening on this state change error, and we're also setting our show spinner to false if that occurs, because that means the transition really has ended, unfortunately, unsuccessfully. And once again, we're taking the canceling function for that listener, and we are pushing it onto our cancelers array. Okay, so the very last part is that we're using the lifecycle method $onDestroy when this scope is getting destroyed. We're going to go ahead and take our cancelers array. That's what we've been pushing everything on since it's sitting outside of the $init. We're going to take this cancelers array, and for each member of that array, we're going to go ahead and invoke this function and take the item in that array, which is what is going to get passed into it through each iteration, and we're going to invoke it, canceling listening for that particular event. Okay, so all that's left is to save, go to our browser, and let's try this out. We'll click, and you can see it's spinning, showing us that something is working. So if we click on here again, it's so quick, and since we're not really reaching out to any asynchronous services, it's so quick that we don't even see that at all. So as we keep clicking here, we're not going to see the spinning, but if we go home again and click on this, we'll see the spinning again, and that is an indication to the user that something is going on while the next state is loaded. Okay, so in a nutshell, that's pretty much the features of UI router. And believe it or not, we actually went pretty deep on that topic as well. Before we finish the entire UI router topic, I do want to show you where to get documentation for this UI router. Go ahead and Google UI-router. You can even Google Angular, and you'll see that you'll get to this GitHub page, which is going to be the UI router GitHub page. What you want to do is, it's a little bit unfortunately confusing the way they've set it up here because there's so many versions flying around, and most of them, again, unfortunately, are pointing to the wrong one. What you want to do is you want to scroll all the way down on that page, and you'll see an in-depth guide link. If you click that in-depth guide link, by and large, this documentation is pretty accurate, and it's actually pretty good. Another thing to point out is that very soon, hopefully, the UI router is going to release its 1.0 version. And the 1.0 version is going to be very much component centric, which is something that Angular is really moving towards in Angular 2 and in Angular 1 as well. It's moving to the component based architecture. So watch out for that, and once it actually is released, you will no longer even have to specify controllers in your states. You will directly be able to specify components that are responsible for handling the entire state that you're defining. Okay, so let's summarize. UI Router exposes numerous state change events that our code is able to listen out for. All UI Router events are fired on the $root scope. There are several events in particular that we probably are interested in almost all the time. One of them is $state change start. That is the event that signals that the state transition has started. You could call event.prevent_default to prevent the transition from finishing. State change success indicates a successful transition end, and state change error indicates that the transition failed, including having some errors in the resolve. Now you need to listen for this particular event, $state change error, to catch all errors during state transition. For example, the errors that come out from the resolve functionality are not displayed in the console and are basically swallowed, and the only way you could look at them is to actually listen out for the state change error event of the UI router.